Welcome to my second video on the Sony a7 III. When Sony introduced the a7 III to the community several months ago, they called it a basic model. This is either a huge understatement or an ingenious marketing strategy. The a7 III combines the best of three worlds in one body. An insanely good sensor with a huge dynamic range, similar to the a7R III, and besides some nice video features, awesome low light capabilities, pretty much on par with the low light monster, the a7S II. In addition, a very fast autofocus, including the awesome Sony IAF, which is nearly as fast as the one in the A9. And you get all of this for a reasonable price of some $2,000 in the US or some 2,300 euros in the EU. The a7 III will sell like hell and probably cannibalize sales of the a7R III and the A9. I'm pretty sure Sony knew that already when they introduced the a7 III to the community. So why is Sony doing this? Is it because Sony acts philanthropically and just wants to provide photographers and filmmakers with the best possible gear? Or is it because Sony's market intelligence had figured out that Nikon is about to launch its own mirrorless camera in the semi-professional or professional segment, which forces Sony to get as much market share as possible and as quickly as possible? We will probably never get to know the real reasons, but you and I shouldn't care too much about it, since we are just glad that Sony provides us with such a beast of a camera, fully packed with professional features and functions for a really competitive price that, for sure, has scared Canon and Nikon to death when they got to know about it. In my view, the Sony a7 III is the best hybrid camera, or in other words, the most versatile all-round camera on the market, providing professional features and functions for many kinds of photographers and filmmakers. Sure, this is just my personal view, but it's based on an analytical and I guess objective comparison of the a7 III specs and versatility with other cameras from Sony and other brands that carry a much higher price tag. You will most likely agree as you are watching this video because you have already purchased this engineering miracle after a thoughtful decision-making process and now want to get to know more about it. And the rest of you guys, after you have heard about the a7 III specs and features in the second part of this video, will conclude that you get the most bang for your buck with the Sony a7 III. You will be asking yourself, why the hell do I still stick with Canon or Nikon? So stay tuned until right after my quick intro. I'm gonna split the now following part of this video in two chapters, major and minor new features. As already emphasized in my first video on the a7 III, other YouTubers have already covered the major new features of this camera to some degree. For the sake of completeness, I will quickly mention them, but just as an introduction to what I then want to add as a supplementary information. In the second chapter on the minor or not so obvious new features, you will hopefully find a lot of new information about the a7 III, which has not yet been addressed by other YouTubers. Okay, let's start with the major new features first. Quite obviously, the most important part of a camera of this caliber is its sensor. The Sony a7 III is built around a really impressive 5-axis image stabilized 24 megapixel back illuminated full frame CMOS sensor with great low ISO dynamic range and high ISO noise performance. The back illuminated structure enhances its light collection efficiency, which is a major reason for its outstanding low light capabilities, which should be almost on par with the low light monster a7S II, but at double the resolution. These low light capabilities will catch your eye and are most striking in two situations. In photography with low ISO values but long exposures where the sensor heats up over time, which, amenable to the laws of physics, increases noise, and filming with high ISO values under low light conditions where the heightened sensitivity increases the noise. Here you can see two examples for each situation. This is a photo of the skyline of the German city Frankfurt by night exposed for 4 seconds at ISO 100. Even with pixel peeping, you won't find any noise in the shadows or elsewhere. This is an image of some rocks in the sea off the Creek Island Road, shot with an ND filter during the day. It was shot on a very bright day at ISO 50 with a long exposure of 30 seconds. The air temperature that day was some 28 degrees Celsius, which is about 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and the a7 III stood on a tripod in direct sunlight. Hence, ideal conditions to test the propensity of the sensor to heat up and generate noise. But even under these conditions, you can't see any noise, not even when pixel peeping. The following two videos were shot at night at ISO 6400. The first one is a time-lapse with 24 frames per second where each frame was exposed for 1/15th of a second to get some motion blur. The second one is a video also with 24 frames per second where each frame was exposed for 1/50th of a second. Here as well you can't see any noise even when pixel peeping. But even if you get into situations where the sensor produces some noise, the A7III offers market-leading noise reduction and detail in out-of-camera JPEGs via its image processor. A more extensive low-light test with the A7III was done by Max Yuryev, for which I have provided a link below in the comment section. The A7III has an ISO range from 100 to 51,200, which is expandable to ISO 102,400 when shooting videos, or to an ISO range of 50 to 204,800 for stills. However, since the native ISO range is limited to 100 to 51,200, lower and higher ISO values won't benefit you. And a range from ISO 100 to 51,200 should be absolutely sufficient for 99.9% of all situations anyway. Not surprisingly, the A7III delivers its highest dynamic range of 14.7 EV at ISO 100, which is only a tad below the A7R III, to be precise, just 0.2 EV lower. What's surprising though is the jump in dynamic range at ISO 640. At this point, the sensor's second stage of its dual gain architecture kicks in. From that point way up to ISO 25,600, the A7III's dynamic range does not only remain higher than that of the A7R III by 0.3 EV, but it also has practical implications. When you face a situation where you have to use at least ISO 400 and you would intuitively use ISO 400 instead of, let's say, ISO 800, you should in fact use ISO 800 because the dynamic range of the A7III as well as the A7R III is higher at ISO 800 than at ISO 400 due to its dual gain architecture and still negligible noise. Okay, that might have been too much technical detail already at this point, but I found this too interesting not to mention it. While the sensor of the A7III is not a stacked CMOS sensor like the one of the A9, some of the A9's technology has been adopted for the A7III. For example, the electronic shutter mode at a still impressive speed of 10 frames per second with AE/AF tracking and a new faster hybrid AF system. What should be noted though is that due to the slower readout of the sensor as compared to the A9, there is more of a rolling shutter issue with the A7III with fast moving subjects or when the camera is rapidly moved sideways while shooting. But it's still better than with most other hybrid cameras I have seen. And apart from that, the rolling shutter issue can easily be reduced by switching to mechanic shutter. Furthermore, the so-called high plus burst mode with 10 frames per second has a couple of disadvantages. At 10 frames per second, raw data output drops from 14-bit to 12-bit and you lose the live view mode. Consequently, I would choose the high instead of the high plus burst mode in most cases. At 8 frames per second in high mode, you get 14-bit raw output and live view support. As regards the hybrid AF system of the A7III, you've probably already heard of these impressive numbers, 425 contrast detection AF points that are complemented by 693 face detection points, which cover 93% of the frame. Since this technical feature has already been addressed by other YouTubers, I just want to add this. While the A7III provides several levers which combined give you an almost infinite number of permutations to optimize tracking of a subject in continuous AF for each possible situation, it requires you to engage intensively with all those settings. Unfortunately, I have seen videos where people compared the A7III's AF system to the one of another much more familiar camera to them, for which they knew how to optimize the AF settings, but quite obviously didn't know it for the A7III and concluded it's worse. This of course is an unfair comparison, but don't worry, the A7III's AF system is very fast and reliable. It is almost as fast as the A9, which is currently seen as one of the fastest cameras, if not the fastest camera out there. While focusing, the camera uses the face detection AF for speed and the contrast detection AF for ultimate precision and accuracy. Sony has combined these two AF technologies in a hybrid AF system that works tremendously well even under suboptimal light conditions. The same applies to the meanwhile famous IAF, which is a really awesome feature that will thrill every wedding, beauty and fashion photographer. While face recognition works great with the A7 III, IAF is much more accurate, especially when shooting at wide apertures. And while in the past one had to assign IAF to a button and then push that button to activate it, in the A7 III the IAF now kicks in automatically when shooting in AFS mode with face detection enabled. And if you have registered that face beforehand, it even works in a group of people. During the course of these tutorials, you will learn how to optimize the A7 III's AF system for all kinds of situations. You will be able to achieve great results even with unpredictably moving subjects like kids wildly playing in the garden. There are also some nice features for filmmakers. The A7 III delivers very high quality 4K and HD video. When filming in 4K at 24p, you will get an oversampled video taken from full width 6K or from 5K when filming in 4K at 30p. In other words, in 4K at 24p, the camera condenses 2.4 times the data required for 4K, which means you will get a full pixel readout without binning. This produces really crisp videos and reduces moire and shaggies. Furthermore, 4K and HD recording with Sony's XAVCS format can be done with bitrates of up to 100 megabits per second, which can be boosted when using an external recorder for even better quality. A really interesting feature that Sony first introduced to the A7 series with the A7R III is the new hybrid log gamma picture profile that supports instant HDR workflow. With that feature, you can capture high dynamic range scenes and display them on an HDR supporting monitor or TV without having to do cumbersome color grading. And while it would have been nice to have 10-bit video recording, the 8-bit internal and external video capture of the A7 III doesn't seem to limit log footage flexibility too much and is on average about on par with the Sony FS5 that can capture video in 10-bit and costs more than twice. Talking about ergonomics, Sony has long been criticized for not equipping their cameras with a touchscreen. Since Sony listens to their customers, the A7 III now got one. Despite that, there is some criticism because the touchscreen functionality is limited to setting the focus point and navigating photos in playback mode, but not to navigate the menu system. Personally, I don't miss a touchscreen when navigating the menus because I'm probably faster using the control wheel or joystick, which Sony calls the multi-selector. However, coming from Nikon, that multi-selector is definitely a feature I had missed with Sony cameras prior to the A7 III and the A9, which is therefore an invaluable asset to me. Another ergonomic improvement that Sony has introduced with the A7 III is the repositioning of the movie button from the right edge of the body to right next to the viewfinder. Now the movie button can be easily reached with your thumb. In the past, Sony has also been criticized a lot for its menu system. Frankly, I've never had an issue with it. In fact, switching from Nikon to a Canon menu system when I tested a friend's Canon camera was more confusing to me than switching to Sony. I believe the real reason why people complained about the Sony menu system was just that they didn't find the menus they were used to in the Sony cameras, and because they just might have been overwhelmed by the myriad of features, functions and settings the Sony menu system offers. It's impossible to get familiar with it within a few hours. One really has to engage intensively with it. Nevertheless, Sony's new menu system has definitely improved a lot, as they now distinguish between functions for photography and cinematography, which now appear in two separate menu items. And for those ones who are still not convinced, I'm talking about the unreformable Canon and Nikon shooters, Sony has added the new My Menu, which lets you create and customize an optimal menu for your own convenience, where you can register up to 30 frequently used functions and/or features. Thus, no excuse anymore not to switch to Sony. A big deal for many folks out there seems to be the new NP-FC100 battery, which gives you a much longer battery life, according to Sony more than twice as long. And in fact, working with the A7 III for several months now, I think it's even longer than that. And with the addition of a second media slot with UHS 2 support, Sony also caught up with professional cameras of Canon and Nikon. Another big feature, not for the A7 III in particular, but for Sony E-mount cameras in general, is the support of Sony A-mount and APS-C lenses, as well as for lenses of several other manufacturers. With the right adapter, the A7 III takes that support to the next level. For example, the awesome AF now even works with many other than the native E-mount lenses. That's a big plus for people who want to switch from other brands. Sony makes it easy for them. Okay, let's talk about the minor, not so obvious new features now. I'm just calling them minor because other YouTubers apparently haven't deemed them important enough to address them in their videos, but which are very useful and therefore can be very important to some photographers and filmmakers, which is why I want to mention them here. One of those features is color reproduction, which has also been criticized in the past, especially by Canon shooters. Canon is known for nice skin tones. In fact, Sony has improved color reproduction with the a7 III. Whether it's skin tones in portraits, blue skies in landscapes, or vivid hues in still life, colors look even better and more realistic now. While other YouTube videos on the a7 III stress the technical specs of its hybrid AF system, those features mostly apply to the AF for still photography. In my view, the most interesting feature is the lock-on AF function in continuous AF mode. You define your focus point via the multi-selector, i.e. joystick, or the touchscreen, and the AF locks to your subject. The AF options in movie mode or less, and lock-on AF does only work in still mode. However, there's a similar function in movie mode, which is called center lock-on AF. With the a7 III's predecessor, you had to bring your subject to the center of the frame before the AF could capture and then track it. Now, in combination with the touchscreen, center lock-on AF works similar to the lock-on AF function in still mode. No matter where your subject is located in the frame, you just define it as focus point and it will be tracked. And if your subject is a face, even better, then the camera does everything automatically. Face detection now also works with 4K video. Furthermore, you can fine-tune the AF's behavior even in movie mode. As you can see, there's progress versus its predecessor even on this front. While not new, professional features like zebras, peaking, and focus magnifier help with exposure and manual focus, features that I have been missing with most cameras of other brands. For example, while in manual focus mode, just double tap on the touch screen and the focus magnifier will pop up to help you exactly define your focus point and maximize sharpness. In one of the first videos on the a7 III on YouTube, somebody complained the a7 III would not support the upload of apps anymore and therefore is unable to do time lapses without an extra intervalometer. While it's true that it doesn't support the upload of apps anymore, which in fact is a shame, it's wrong that you can't do time lapses anymore. The a7 III's S&Q function, which stands for slow and quick and can be invoked quickly via the mode dial, lets you comfortably do time lapses, at least up to intervals of 1 frame per second. Depending on the playback mode, you can do up to 60 times quick motion videos. And S&Q makes it also easy to do up to 5 times slow motion videos natively, i.e. without the need to transcode it later in post-processing, which is what you would have to do if you shot with video file format set to XAVCS HD and record settings set to 120p. When it comes to ergonomics, one should definitely not forget to mention the infinite number of options to customize the a7 III to your liking, a feature that I have been surprised no other YouTuber has extensively covered yet. While there are 4 official custom buttons, you can assign functions to 12 buttons. However, you can assign different functions to each one of those buttons for each one of the 3 modes: still image, movie, and playback mode. In other words, you can assign up to 36 functions to those buttons altogether. And there are functions which you won't find in the menu system and therefore expand the capabilities of the a7 III even more and provide you with additional options. Furthermore, you are not limited to assign only 1 function to a button. You can create up to 3 so-called custom shoot sets, which comprise settings for 10 functions each, and assign them to a button. In addition, you can recall nearly every setting of the a7 III by using one of 6 memory slots, of which 2 are directly accessible via the mode dial and 4 via the menu that pops up when you invoke one of the first 2 via the mode dial. And finally, you can create your own customized menu via My Menu, as already mentioned in the prior chapter. No matter from what other brand you switch to Sony, you can customize the a7 III as you want for your own convenience. When it comes to connectivity, the a7 III offers all you'll ever need: Wi-Fi, NFC, and Bluetooth. While you can quickly transfer downsized photos via NFC to your smartphone for immediate on-the-fly upload to social media, you can directly upload full-size photos and videos to your file server via FTP if you have a Wi-Fi internet connection. No notebook required. And while the A7 III does not have a built-in GPS receiver, it can communicate with your smartphone's GPS via Bluetooth link for geotagging of your photos. As regards connectivity, one should also mention the upgrade to USB 3.1 Type-C. It does not only allow for faster transfer when uploading images or videos to your computer via USB cable, but also smoother tethered shooting when working in a studio. And really a big plus for the A7 III, as for several other Sony cameras, is the fact that they support continuous external power supply via their micro USB port. While the battery life of the new NP-FC 100 battery is pretty long, it would probably not survive a day-long video shooting or time-lapse. Just connect it to your power bank and you're fine. And last but not least, there's a rating function in playback mode now. While I typically rate my pictures only after uploading them to my computer and examining them on a big screen, people have obviously asked for this feature and Sony has delivered. With this, I want to conclude this video and hope it was helpful for your decision-making process if you consider to purchase the A7 III, or if you have already done so, you hopefully discovered new features of the A7 III you haven't known before. If so, I would be delighted to get your thumbs up. And if you want to be the first to be notified when my next video is online, just hit the subscribe button and bell icon next to it. While this video was meant to give you a comprehensive list of the most important features of the A7 III, the actual series of tutorials starts with the next video. You might have pre-ordered the A7 III several weeks ago, had to wait a long time and just received it. Now you can hardly wait to play around with it and test it. The next videos will bring you up to speed quickly to do exactly that. They will be your kickstart to the A7 III's universe.